Iris Callahan woke with her mouth pressed against a man's throat and no memory of how she had gotten there. A button was missing from his shirt. A faint red mark sat under his jaw. The man asleep beneath her was Dario Ferrante, 59 years old, the one man in Halcyon House that every servant had been forbidden to approach, and she had worked there exactly 2 days. When his eyes opened, he did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been awake for hours deciding what to tell her. If you want to hear what he said, subscribe and stay with this story until the very end, and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The first thing Iris understood was the weight of a stranger's arm across her waist. The second thing she understood was that her own knee was trapped between his legs and that she had put it there herself. She did not scream. Some part of her had learned years ago that screaming costs more than silence, that a woman who makes noise in a rich man's house is the one who gets removed from it. So she lay perfectly still and did an inventory of her own body, the way a person checks a wound before deciding whether to panic. Her nightgown was hers. It had ridden above her knees, but it was hers, the same worn cotton she had worn out of her own room. Her underwear was on. Nothing hurt, nothing was torn, and still her mouth felt tender in a way that made her stomach drop through the floor. Then she saw the button on the sheet beside her hand, black and small, and unmistakably belonging to the shirt he was still wearing. She pushed herself back so fast that the mattress moved, and Dario Ferrante opened his eyes. He did not startle. He did not reach for the weapon she already knew was somewhere in that room, because everyone in the staff wing knew there was one. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at a verdict he has already been given. She asked him how she had gotten into his bed. He told her she had walked in. She asked him why a button was missing from his shirt. His eyes moved to her mouth before he answered, and he said it was because she would not let go of him. The heat that went through her was worse than fear. Fear she could have handled. Fear had a shape. What arrived instead was a single flash of memory that lasted less than a second. His hand closing at her waist, her fingers twisted into his collar, his mouth moving against hers, and then it was gone before she could hold it, the way a dream dissolves the moment you try to describe it. She asked him if he had kissed her. I was quiet for one full second, and she would remember that second for the rest of her life, because it was the moment she understood he was not going to lie to protect himself. He told her that she had kissed him first. Her hand flew to her lips. She asked in a voice she did not recognize whether he had kissed her back. He said yes. He said he had kissed her back long enough to realize she was not awake. She looked at the wrecked bed. She looked at his open collar, the twisted sheets, the shape their bodies had left. She asked him how far it had gone, and she braced herself because she had spent her entire adult life bracing for the answer men give when they have already decided the answer is not their problem. He sat up slowly and told her it had gone farther than it should have, and not as far as she feared. She told him that was not an answer. He agreed. He said it was not. And then he said the thing that shocked her more than any of it, the thing that rearranged the entire morning, because it was not a defense and it was not a threat. He told her that before he explained anything else, she was going to have to explain to him why she had come into his room in the middle of the night, crying and begging him not to put her suitcase outside. Iris went completely still, because 2 nights before she had come home from a 12-hour shift and found that navy suitcase standing upright on her own brother's front steps in the rain. It had not been raining hard enough for anyone walking past to feel sorry for her. That detail stayed with her longer than the rest of it. Just a thin, patient drizzle, enough to soak through the bottom of the cardboard box that held their father's books, not enough to make her look like a tragedy. She had stood there with a bag of discount groceries pulling at her hip, milk pressed against bread, a jar of sauce knocking softly against 2 cans of soup, and she had tried very hard for about 8 seconds to believe that Theo and Marissa were clearing out a closet. Then she saw the note folded and taped to the suitcase handle. He had written that she should not make this harder than it needed to be. He had written that Marissa needed the room for the baby. He had written that she had always known the arrangement was not permanent and that they had packed everything carefully, and he had signed it with his name, like a man signing off on a delivery. She read it twice. She read it a third time, standing in the drizzle with her arm going numb from the groceries. The key she had carried for 11 years still slid into the lock. It just did not turn anymore. She knocked. Nobody came. She rang the bell and heard the television volume drop. Inside heard Marissa's quick footsteps crossed the hall, heard the specific quality of a silence that is being performed on purpose. She called Theo, he let it ring out. She called again, and he answered without saying anything at all, which was somehow worse than shouting. She asked him to open the door. He told her in the low voice he used when his wife was standing near him not to make a scene. She told him she was standing in the rain. He told her there was cash in the front pocket of the suitcase and that it should cover a motel for a few nights. That was the moment something inside her went quiet, not loud, quiet, because a man does not put cash in a suitcase pocket in a burst of emotion. A man puts cash in a suitcase pocket the night before, calmly, having already decided. She said his wife's name. She said Marissa had counted how many slices of bread she ate. She said Marissa had told his friends that Iris was a grown woman refusing to leave her brother's house and had somehow forgotten to mention the 2 years Iris had paid the mortgage while Theo was out of work after the accident, the property taxes, the physical therapy, the crib she had bought when the pregnancy test came back positive. Theo told her the house had been left to him. And the terrible part was that it was true. Their father had believed a son should inherit a house. Iris had believed that family made the paperwork irrelevant. She had been wrong in the specific way that costs a person 6 years. She asked him where her deposit money was. $400 saved in tens and twenties behind an old photograph in her dresser every payday for over a year. He told her Marissa had found the envelope. He told her they had used part of it for the hospital deductible and put the rest in her suitcase. She asked him what she was, if the baby was family. He did not answer that. He said their father would not want them fighting. She said their father would not have left her suitcase outside in the rain. He said she did not know that. She took the house key off her ring, crouched down, and put it under the doormat. She told him he was right. She did not know that, and she hung up before her voice could break where he could hear it. The cash in the suitcase pocket came to $180. Her bank account held 63. Payday was 9 days away. The cheapest motel near the hotel where she worked was 90 a night before tax. She called 3 women. One had moved in with her boyfriend's parents. One had 2 children and a studio apartment. The third was Basma Haddad, who answered on the first ring, heard about 4 words, and told Iris to send her location. Iris said she did not need rescuing. Basma said fine, she was coming to aggressively accompany her instead. 40 minutes later, a rusted white van pulled up with a dented side door, and Basma did not hug her on the pavement and did not say that Thea would regret it someday. She picked up the box of their father's books, felt the wet cardboard giving way at the bottom, and said they needed plastic bags. That practical kindness almost broke Iris in a way that sympathy never could have. There was no couch at Basma's because Basma lived with her parents and 2 brothers and a sister-in-law and 3 nieces. So they drove to an all-night diner, and Basma ordered fries and tea and a slice of chocolate pie that Iris did not touch, and somewhere between the second and third cup, Basma mentioned a live-in position. Private room, meals, uniform, immediate pay, available tomorrow morning. Iris asked why it was available tomorrow morning. Basma looked into her tea and said the owner was difficult. Iris asked if difficult meant rude. Basma said difficult meant Dario Ferrante. Everyone in Kestrel Bay knew that name, though not many people said it at full volume. Ferrante Marine owned 3 deep-water berths, half the warehouses along the North Channel, and a private security company whose employees did not look like guards. The newspapers called him a shipping magnate. People who worked night shifts called him something else. Iris asked if she was being sent to work for a criminal. Basma said allegedly, and that the word was doing a lot of heavy lifting. She said her aunt had worked with the household staff for years. She said the housekeeper was decent, that staff were paid on time and in full, that nobody touched the maids, and that nobody entered a staff room without permission. The work was brutal. The rules were clear. Iris looked at the untouched pie and at the rain crawling down the diner window, and she said that she had already lived with worse people than that. By 9 the next morning, she was standing in front of iron gates taller than her brother's entire house, with a background check freshly cleared and clothes she had washed at a 24-hour laundromat because she had not slept anyway. Helena Novak met her at the service entrance. 66 years old, silver hair, pinned back, hard, dressed in black, severe enough to look like mourning. She read Iris's file without smiling and asked about the 6 years of hotel experience and about the weekend shifts Iris had refused to give up. Iris told her she intended to keep those shifts until she could afford not to. Helena studied her for a long moment and asked whether she had been evicted. Iris said not legally. Helena did not ask again, and Iris understood that this woman had spent 31 years in a house where not asking again was a form of mercy. Then Helena walked her through the kitchens and the laundry and the service corridors, and up to a small room on the second floor of the east wing with a single bed, a dresser, a narrow wardrobe, a desk, and a window facing the water. To Iris, it looked like a palace. Helena put a key into her hand and told her it was hers. She said she kept an emergency master and used it only for fire medical danger or when the occupant asked her to. She said Mr. Ferrante had no copy at all. Iris said he owned the house. Helena said he owned the door. Privacy belonged to the person standing behind it. Iris's fingers closed around that key so tightly the metal left a mark in her palm. She opened the suitcase long enough to take out 2 uniforms, her underwear, and her toiletries. Then she closed it again and stood it upright beside the wardrobe. Unpacking would have been a promise, and the room had not made her any promises yet. She saw him 2 hours later polishing the brass rail beside the main staircase, when every conversation in the hall below stopped at once. He came in behind his men, carrying nothing, speaking so quietly that everyone in the room leaned toward him without realizing they were doing it. He was older than she expected and far more solid, silver at the temples and through the trimmed stubble along his jaw, a face with lines cut into it by age rather than softened by it. 59 had not made him frail. It had made him look like a man who had survived long enough to stop proving anything to anybody. His eyes found her on the stairs. He asked Helena if she was new, and Helena gave her name, and then he looked at Iris's wrist at the bruise the suitcase handle had left across it, and he asked how long the replacement was expected to last. Iris did not know whether he was speaking to Helena or to her. One of his men glanced at her in warning. She told him it would last as long as the job did. He said that had not been the question. She said it was the only answer she had. He held her eyes exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable, and then he walked away, and Helena waited until the men were gone before mentioning that most employees called him sir. Iris asked if she had lost the room. Helena's mouth moved almost far enough to become a smile, and she said no. That night, the house fed 12 men who spoke in low voices and left armed, and Iris carried plates until her feet burned inside shoes with soles worn thin enough to feel every seam in the floor. At 10, she brought an untouched dinner tray back down to the kitchen, and the cook swore softly and said it was the third one that day. Iris asked if he had sent it back. The cook said he had forgotten it existed. Iris looked at the skin forming on the soup and thought about Theo taking painkillers on an empty stomach after the accident and about her father in his last months refusing food while she begged him from the doorway. She reheated the soup, cut the chicken, smaller added bread, and carried half a portion back up. The guard outside the study told her he had not requested anything. She said his body had. The guard told her to go downstairs, and then the study door opened behind him. Dario stood there with his sleeves rolled back and reading glasses in one hand and asked her what exactly his body wanted. She held up the tray and said apparently nothing, which was why she had brought half a portion instead of the third full dinner his kitchen was about to throw away. The guard stared at her like she had lost her mind. Dario looked at the bowl for a moment and told her he was working. She said the soup did not require conversation. He said she was very certain for someone who had been in the house 2 days. She said hunger worked the same way in expensive houses. Something moved behind his eyes. He stepped aside. She put the tray down and then she made a mistake, or what she assumed at the time was a mistake. She pointed at the medication bottle sitting beside his hand and told him the label said to take it with food. He asked whether she read labels in her employer's study. She said she read labels while collecting empty glasses. He asked if she also gave medical orders. She said only when the patient was making the cook prepare the same chicken 3 separate times. He should have dismissed her on the spot. Instead, he sat down, picked up the spoon, and tasted the soup, and Iris left before he could decide whether or not to be offended. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard the study door open again, and a second man come out older, expensively dressed with the same jaw as Dario, and none of the stillness. He was talking as he walked, and he did not lower his voice for staff because men like that never do. He asked Dario casually, almost pleasantly, who exactly he intended to leave the controlling shares to since he had never managed to produce a child. Dario did not answer him. Iris kept walking with the empty tray against her hip, and she did not know that she had just heard the reason for everything that would happen to her. At 11:40, she locked her door. Then she took the small brass bell out of her suitcase, the one from her father's supply shop, the one she had carried since she was 19, and she hooked it over the door handle, and she wedged the desk chair underneath it. She had gone 18 months without an episode. A doctor had once called it adult sleepwalking, aggravated by stress and sleep deprivation, and had told her that strict routine was the only real defense, and Iris had built her entire adult life around that sentence. She told herself the bell was only a habit now, just something her hands did. She fell asleep at 1:43. At 2:17, she sat up without waking. Her eyes opened. Her mind stayed locked somewhere between her brother's front door and the service corridor she had memorized that afternoon. She moved the chair. The bell rang once softly and folded itself into the dream instead of ending it. She unlocked her own door and walked out barefoot. She went up the service stairs across the gallery past the painting of a dark-haired woman in a red dress toward the private floor where the night guard stood. The guard at the landing straightened and said her name. She looked directly at him and murmured something about Mr. Ferrante's water. He glanced at her empty hands and told her to go back downstairs. She kept walking. He moved to stop her and then hesitated because she was a woman in a white nightgown with nothing in her hands and because the bedroom door was already opening. Dario was still dressed. He had not gone to bed at all. She walked past the guard as though he did not exist, crossed the room and straightened a glass that was already straight. She smoothed one corner of the blanket. She adjusted a pillow. She touched the closed curtain. He said her name. She did not turn around. He asked her if she knew where she was. Her mouth moved and she said that she had worked. He asked her again where she was. She said she had paid for everything. He looked toward the guard and told him to get Helena quietly. Iris sat down on the edge of his bed and rubbed one bare foot against the rug like she was searching the floor for something, and she whispered that they had put it outside. He lowered himself to one knee in front of her, careful not to touch her, and asked what they had put outside. She said her suitcase. He told her she was in his bedroom and that she needed to wake up. Her eyes filled with tears that had no recognition behind them at all, and she told him she had done everything they asked. Helena came in barefoot with her robe half-tied and her silver hair loose, took one look and said the word sleepwalking before anyone else could. She offered her hand. Iris stared straight through it. Helena touched her wrist gently and Iris recoiled like she had been burned and grabbed the nearest solid thing in the world, which was the front of Dario Ferrante's shirt. She twisted the fabric in both fists and begged him not to put it outside. He told her nobody was moving her suitcase. Helena tried to lift her. Iris's grip tightened and a button snapped loose and hit the floor and rolled, and Dario caught her elbow before she slid off the mattress. And then for one strange moment, her focus seemed to come back. Her palm lifted to his face. Her thumb moved across the silver in his beard. He went completely still. She leaned forward and put her mouth on his. It was not a delicate kiss. It had the blind urgency of someone reaching for the only door in the world that had not been closed against them. His shock lasted less than a second, and then 25 years of refusing anyone at all, lost to the simple warmth of her mouth, and his hand closed at her waist, and he kissed her back. Her fingers slid into his collar and pulled him closer. Her breath caught. That sound hit him like cold water. He broke the kiss and did not release her immediately because her eyes were open and looking at nothing. He asked her to say his name. She touched his lower lip like the question had come from another room and asked him to stay. He asked her again for his name. She could not give it. He asked her where she was. She had no answer. He took his hand off her waist like the skin underneath it had burned him, and he said no. She tried to follow his mouth. He turned his face away and told her not while she could not choose him. Helena stood in the doorway and did not pretend she had seen nothing. He asked if they could move her. Helena said they could guide her if she would come, but that forcing her might make her fight them or fall. She tried again gently, and Iris shook her head and held onto his shirt with both hands and begged him not to make her leave, and the rawness in it stopped even Helena where she stood. He said she could not stay there. Helena said she could if someone stayed and the door remained open, and that she would very likely settle into deeper sleep within the hour, and that in the morning she might remember none of it. He tried to free the fabric out of her fingers. She made a small, wounded sound and held on tighter. Helena told him he could cut the shirt. He could have. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed and read reports one-handed for the better part of an hour while a woman he had known for 2 days held onto the other side of his shirt in her sleep, with the door standing open and the housekeeper awake in the next room. At some point, exhaustion took him, and he lay down on the far edge of the mattress with a folded blanket laid deliberately between them. Sometime before dawn, she crossed it. She put her cheek against his throat and tucked one knee between his legs, and he woke with her body against his and stared at the ceiling until the light came with one arm around her waist for the single purpose of keeping her from rolling off the edge. Helena sat in the next room until 5. And when Iris finally opened her eyes and understood where her mouth was resting, the scream did not come right away. It came several seconds later after she saw the missing button, and after the man beneath her opened his eyes and told her the truth without once trying to make it smaller than it was. Helena came in while he was still talking and confirmed every detail, including the fact that she had sat awake in the next room until 5 in the morning with the door open and that nobody had entered or left that room without her seeing it. Iris listened with one hand pressed flat over her mouth. She tried to ask the question and could not finish it, and Dario finished it for her. He told her the nightgown she was wearing was the one she had walked out of her own room in. Nobody had changed her. Nobody had undressed her. Nothing had happened beyond what he had already described, and he was not going to describe it more gently than it deserved. The relief hit her first. The humiliation came half a second behind it, and it burned hotter. She told him he should have said that the moment she opened her eyes. He said she had asked whether anything had happened, and something had. She said he had let her believe the worst. He said for less than 2 minutes. She said 2 minutes had been long enough, and his face hardened, though not at her. She understood watching it that the anger in him was pointed entirely inward. He told her he had no right to answer her kiss and that he was not going to protect himself by pretending otherwise. Iris turned to Helena and asked whether the guard had seen her. Helena said one guard had seen her come onto the floor and that Mr. Ferrante had dismissed him before sunrise. Iris's face went white. She said it was because he had seen her. Helena said no, it was because he had told 2 other men that the new maid had come upstairs to offer their employers something the rest of the staff could not. Dario's voice dropped so low it barely carried. He said an unconscious woman was a vulnerable person, not entertainment. Iris looked down at the black button lying near her knee and said she needed to leave. He told her she could immediately without a pause, and the speed of it knocked something loose in her chest. He said her full month's salary would be paid regardless. He said Helena could arrange a transfer to another property or a hotel room for 2 weeks. He said a physician who specialized in sleep disorders could see her that same afternoon if she wanted one. She asked if he was firing her. He said no. She said she had walked into his bedroom and torn his shirt. He said she had been asleep. She said she had kissed him. He said she had been asleep. She said he had kissed her back, and something dark moved across his face, and he told her that failure belonged to him and not to her. Helena put a robe within reach and left them. Dario turned his back to the room while Iris tied it and only spoke again once she had. He said there was a fourth option. She could stay. There would be a written safety procedure. Helena would be called first during any episode every time. An alarm would be installed in her room that alerted nobody but Helena. No recordings kept without her approval. He would not enter her room unless her life was in immediate danger. She would not come onto his floor after 10 at night unless Helena assigned the work while she was awake and standing in front of her. Iris asked what happened to everyone who had seen her. He said they would be instructed to stay silent. She asked if that meant by fear. He said if necessary. She told him that would make her the woman the boss quietly protected because she had been found in his bed, and that she would rather be fired than become that. He asked her what she would prefer instead. And that was the sentence that undid her, because in 28 years, no man in any house she had lived in had asked her that. Her father had decided. Theo had decided. Marissa had decided with the locksmith. She sat on the edge of a bed she had no memory of entering and thought about her suitcase standing in the rain and about the key in her palm and about the fact that $180 would not buy her another room anywhere in this city. And she thought about the fact that this man had stopped when she could not say his name. She told him she wanted to speak to the staff herself. He said then she would. She said she wanted the hallway footage. He said there was hallway footage, only nothing inside the bedroom. And she said she wanted to see it before deciding whether it should be deleted. He agreed. She said one more thing. She said last night did not give him permission to touch her again. He looked at her mouth for exactly as long as it took to be honest about it, and then back at her eyes, and he told her that last night was the reason he would never touch her again without hearing her say yes first. She stayed, because she trusted him. She did not remotely, not yet. She stayed because she refused to let a condition she had managed on her own for 9 years become one more person's excuse to remove her from a room. That afternoon, Helena assembled 30 members of staff, and Iris stood in front of them in a fresh uniform, with her hands cold and perfectly still, and Dario stood at the very back of the room, not beside her and not in front of her. She told them she had a sleep disorder. She told them stress and exhaustion had triggered an episode. She told them she had entered a private room while unconscious, and that she had not entered it to seduce anyone, improve her position, or entertain the household. She said anyone who found an unconscious woman amusing was welcome to stand up and explain why. Nobody stood up. A kitchen girl looked at her shoes. The laundry supervisor studied the floor. Iris said her medical information was private, that she would not apologize for a condition she had not chosen, and that she would follow every line of the safety plan so that it never endangered anyone else in the house. Then she stepped back. From the back of the room, Dario said 4 words. He said they had heard her. That was all. He did not threaten anyone. He did not dismiss half the household or announce that she was under his protection. He let her words stay the loudest thing in the room, and Helena, who had watched him for 31 years, noticed and said nothing. The footage showed exactly what it showed. Iris walking with her eyes open, answering the guard with nothing behind her voice going through the door. She asked for it to be stored in an encrypted medical file rather than destroyed, because some part of her still feared waking up one day with no evidence except another person's version of events. He had the encryption key generated and handed it to her, and kept no copy of it, and she checked twice over the following week that he had not. For 7 days, he avoided being alone with her. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she became aware of her own mouth every time he walked into a room, which infuriated her because she remembered nothing of that kiss, and her body kept reacting to fragments it could not retrieve. The button turned up in the laundry 3 days later, still in the pocket of the ruined shirt. She carried it up to his study and set it on the desk beside his hand and told him it belonged to him. He looked at it and did not touch it. He told her to keep it. She asked why. He said until she decided whether that night was something she wanted forgotten. She said it already was forgotten. He said not by both of them. She put it in the drawer beside her bed, where it became the first object in that room that had nothing to do with survival. After that, the house settled into something almost ordinary, and it was the ordinary things that did the damage. She learned he hated lilies. She learned he took his coffee, bitter enough to qualify as a punishment. She learned he sent dinner back untouched only when he was worried about something, never when he was angry, and that the kitchen had been reading his moods wrong for years. He learned that she hummed while polishing silver, that she counted stairs under her breath when she was anxious, that she folded every spare blanket into exact thirds. I had the service elevator repaired the week after she carried laundry up 3 flights during a breakdown. He raised the footwear allowance for every employee in the house after noticing the split sole of her shoe, and he never once handed her an expensive pair of shoes, and that restraint moved her more than any gift could have. Then Helena told her flatly on a Tuesday morning that the lock on her staff room had been replaced. New key. No master override except a fire mechanism requiring 2 people to activate it simultaneously. Iris found him in the front and told him he had changed her lock. He said yes. She said without asking her. He said she had asked whether the room was truly hers. She said that was not the same as asking for construction. He said nobody entered without her. She asked if that included him. He said especially him. She went back upstairs, opened her suitcase, and put her father's wool scarf in the dresser drawer. She unpacked nothing else. He noticed and he never mentioned it. Theo called 3 times that week. She ignored the first 2. On the third, she answered because guilt always outlasts anger, and he did not ask how she was. He told her Marissa's hospital deductible had come back higher than expected. She told him she had already sent money the month before. He said she used to contribute every payday. She said she also used to live there. He said the baby had not thrown her out. She closed her eyes and told him not to use a child who had not been born yet to make her responsible for the adults who had locked the door. He said their father would be ashamed of her. And there it was, the old weapon still perfectly balanced in his hand after all these years. She told him he did not get to speak for their father only in the months when he needed her paycheck. He asked her if that was it, if she had a rich employer now and family meant nothing. Her breath caught. She said he had put her suitcase on the pavement. He said Marissa had needed the room. She told him to ask the room to pay his bill, and she hung up and she made it as far as the linen closet before she broke. She cried with a towel pressed against her face so nobody would hear. And it was not the house she was grieving. It was the brother she had defended to coworkers and friends and to herself for 6 straight years. Outside the door, footsteps stopped. She held her breath. No knock came. A minute later, they moved away. When she finally opened the door, there was a glass of water and a clean folded handkerchief on the floor. He never mentioned it. At breakfast the next morning, he discussed a plumbing invoice as though he had heard nothing at all. And that was the moment Iris understood that privacy could be a kindness rather than a form of abandonment. 11 days later, she found the payroll discrepancy. $12 from one maid, 18 from another, 25 from a gardener. Small enough that nobody had ever questioned it, repeated every single pay period. She stayed up past midnight comparing paper timesheets against bank deposits and fell asleep over the kitchen table with her cheek beside a column of numbers, and he found her there and did not touch her. He called Helena to wake her. In the morning, she took it to the estate manager, who laughed and told her she did not understand service fees. Dario walked in halfway through that sentence, and Iris watched the man's face change color in real time. He told the manager to continue. The manager could not. She showed him 6 months of altered entries. Within the hour, the payroll supervisor confessed to pocketing the difference. And Dario dismissed him and ordered every worker repaid with interest going back 3 years, not 6 months, because he said the man had almost certainly been doing it longer than the records she had been given. Then he called her into the study and told her she was wasting herself on railings. She said the railings disagreed. He said Helena needed help with the household accounts and that the work paid more. Her first reaction was gratitude. Her second, arriving about a second later, was suspicion, and she asked him whether the offer existed because she had found the theft. He said it existed because she had found what 3 men with business degrees had walked past every month. She asked what happened if she said no to him personally. Not to the job, to him. I went very still, and then he said the job remained. She asked about the room. He said it remained. She asked about the raise. He said it remained. She told him to put it in writing. He did that afternoon, sign, and she read it twice before she accepted. And Helena watched her read it twice, and something in the old woman's expression softened for the first time since Iris had arrived. The new work brought her closer to his legitimate businesses and further from the safety of being invisible. She reviewed vendor bills and maintenance contracts and estate purchases from a small office beside Helena's. She discovered that the house ordered 12 brands of mineral water because in 11 years, nobody had ever asked him which one he preferred. He told her he preferred coffee. She told him that explained the dehydration, and he almost smiled. One night, she found him trying to work the coffee press because the kitchen staff had gone home measuring grounds like they were explosives. And she took the spoon out of his hand and told him a man who owned 3 deep-water berths ought to be able to operate a plunger. He said ownership and operation were separate disciplines. She said that was what incompetent men said right before hiring women to fix things, and he watched her hands the entire time she pressed the grounds and told her she spoke differently when she forgot to be afraid. She poured 2 cups and told him he behaved differently when nobody was watching. He said someone was watching. She did not spill either cup, though her fingers wanted to. The first public humiliation came at the winter charity dinner. Serafina Locke arrived in white fur and diamonds, 41 years old, with the particular confidence of a woman who had never once been asked to justify her presence anywhere. She knew Dario well enough to kiss his cheek. Iris told herself that should not matter to her. It mattered. Serafina pulled off her wrap and dropped it into Iris's arms without looking at her and said to be careful, it had cost more than her annual salary. Iris held it back out and said in that case she should probably keep it herself. Serafina looked at her properly then and said she was the new maid. Iris said she worked there. Serafina said she had heard that Iris had trouble remembering which bedrooms belonged to her. Conversations nearby thinned into nothing. Heat climbed from Iris's chest into her face. Across the room, Dario turned, and Iris saw the exact moment his shoulders went still, and she knew what was about to happen to this woman. She caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of her head, and he waited. Iris handed the wrap back and said she had walked into one room while medically unconscious, and that Serafina had walked into this conversation fully awake, and that only one of them ought to be embarrassed. A man nearby coughed, cover a laugh. Serafina's face hardened, and she asked Dario whether he was allowing staff to speak to guests that way. He did not look at Serafina at all. He looked at Iris and asked if she was finished. She said yes. Then he turned and told Serafina her car was waiting. Serafina asked if he was throwing her out for a maid. He said no. He was asking her to leave because she had used a woman's medical vulnerability to entertain a room. Serafina's eyes narrowed and she said people were talking about him. He said people always talked about him. She said not like this, and her glance flicked toward Iris, and she said he should be careful about what he was confusing with loyalty. She left without the wrap. Iris carried it to the cloakroom herself and hung it up and stood there for a moment with her hands shaking now that it was over. Later, she found him alone by the darkened windows and thanked him for waiting. He said it had been difficult. She said she had noticed. He said his instinct was to remove threats. She said she was not a territory he needed to secure. He agreed. Then his eyes went to her mouth and back, and he told her she was becoming a different kind of problem. Her pulse tripped. She said that sounded like a dismissal. He said it was a confession. She looked away first and she thought about it for 11 days. Then a photograph fell out of a leather folder in his study while she was collecting cups, a young man in a hospital bed with his face bruised and one leg in traction and a woman sitting beside him holding his hand. She picked it up before she understood what it was, and he walked in while it was still in her fingers. She apologized and said it had fallen. He took it and did not put it back in the folder. He said he had been 34. She asked who the woman was. He said Rosalind. He said they had been engaged. She asked what happened, and he looked at that photograph for a long time before he told her that after the accident, he had been informed he would never father a child and that he had ended the engagement before he left the hospital. She asked if he had told Rosalind why. He said no. She asked why not. He said because Rosalind would have tried to convince herself it did not matter. Iris felt her sympathy collide with the much older anger and lose. She told him he did not know that. He said he had known her. She said he had known what Rosalind wanted, and that was not the same thing as knowing what she would have chosen. His face closed. He said Rosalind married 2 years later and had 3 children. Iris said that did not make what he had done kind. He said he had never claimed it was kind. She said he had decided he was less than a whole man and then made that woman live inside his decision without ever being told there was one. And his eyes sharpened, and she understood that very few people had ever spoken to him that way and remained employed by morning. He asked if she believed he should have asked Rosalind to surrender motherhood. She said she believed he should have respected her enough to ask what she was willing to build with him. He looked away and said that at 34 leaving had felt cleaner. She asked about the 25 years since. He said for 25 years he had avoided asking any woman to accept a future that ended with him. The loneliness inside that sentence was buried so deep she almost walked past it. She said quietly that a future was more than children. He said people said that when children were still possible. She said men said they were protecting women when what they were actually doing was getting ahead of being rejected. He turned back to her, and she did not take it back, and her heart was slamming. He said she had become very certain about him. She said no. She had become certain that he made choices for people before they could disappoint him. He put the photograph in a drawer and closed it and said that she kept her suitcase packed so nobody could ask her to leave first. The accuracy of it took the air out of her. That night she opened the drawer beside her bed and took out the black button and held it between 2 fingers. For a long time thinking about the way he had asked her for his name and about the way he had let go. It was past midnight when she went up. She wore pajama trousers and a sweater and slippers, and her hair was tied back, and she was so aware of every step that she counted them under her breath the entire way. She knocked. He opened the door in a black shirt buttoned properly to the throat, and his eyes went over her clothes and her focused, ordinary, wide-awake face, and the buttons sitting in her open palm. He asked if she was awake. She said completely. He asked if she knew where she was. She said outside his bedroom. He asked why she had come. She lifted the button and told him to ask her his name. Something in his expression broke open and was immediately hauled back under control. He asked her what his name was. She said Dario Ferrante. He asked where she was. She said exactly where she had chosen to come. He asked why. Her courage nearly failed her. She closed her fingers around the button and said the first kiss belonged only to him, and she wanted one that belonged to both of them. He stepped closer and did not touch her. He said her name like a question. She said yes. He asked if he could kiss her back this time. She said yes. He kissed her slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, and the restraint in it undid her far more than urgency would have. His hands settled at the side of her neck. Her fingers found the collar of his shirt. When she leaned in, the kiss deepened, and his control did not vanish. It simply became visible in every breath he held back. She opened the top button of his shirt herself. His other hand moved to her waist. Heat went through her so fast that she was pressed against him before she had decided to be, and he made a low sound against her mouth that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure, and he backed one step toward the room and she followed. And then the missing hour from that first night opened underneath her like a dark stairwell. Her whole body went rigid and she said, "Stop." He released her before the word was finished. He stepped back with his hands at his sides, breathing hard, and there was no disappointment sharpening his face and no persuasion coming. He asked if she was all right. She nodded and found there were tears in her eyes and said she had thought she was ready. He said thinking she was ready did not obligate her to stay ready. She asked if he was angry. He asked at what. She said because she had come up here. He said he had asked her, and then she had asked him to stop. He moved further away from the doorway, clearing a path to it, and told her both of those choices belonged to her. She went back down to her room and cried for a reason she could not name, and it was not fear, and it was not shame. It was closer to relief. It was the strange, unfamiliar pain of finding out that a boundary could still be standing after someone had reached it. In the morning, he discussed vendor contracts without once looking at her mouth, and that far more than the kiss was what made her want him again. It stayed untouched until the first week of winter, almost exactly 1 year after she had walked onto his floor asleep, when Iris took it out, carried it down to her car, and put it in the trunk without packing a single thing inside it. Then she drove to Halcyon House. Helena opened the door and looked past her at the car and saw the Navy suitcase sitting in the open trunk, empty, and did not say one word about it. She simply stepped aside. 32 years in that house had taught her exactly when a woman needed to be let through without commentary. Iris did not bring the suitcase in. She left it out there in the cold, and she went up the stairs alone, and she counted every one of them under her breath the way she always had. She knocked once. He opened the door in the black shirt with every button fastened to the throat, and for several seconds, neither of them managed to say anything at all. Then he asked if she was awake. She said completely. He asked if she knew where she was. She said yes. He asked why she had come. And Iris looked past him at the room where she had once woken up, terrified with a stranger's button lying beside her hand, and where she had later stood with her heart pounding and asked him to say her name, and where grief had turned a good man into a man who moved her belongings without asking. And she said the only true thing she had. She said the first time she came to this room, she had been looking for somewhere no one would throw her out of. She said this time she had come because she had finally found a man who understood that love means leaving the door unlocked. His throat moved. He asked if that meant she was staying. She said it meant she was coming inside and told him not to turn one choice into 10. He stepped aside. She walked in and he did not close the door. He left it standing open behind her, exactly as it had been the night Helena sat awake in the next room, and he did not move toward it, and he did not look at it. Iris reached back and closed it herself. They did not fall into each other. There was too much between them for that. He kissed her only after she nodded and she opened his shirt one button at a time and remembered every version of the man underneath it, the stranger who had stopped the lover who had trusted her with a knife against his ribs, the father who had lost himself on the floor of an unfinished room, and the man who had spent 9 months changing with no guarantee that anyone would come back to reward him for it. When they came together again, there was sorrow inside the tenderness and hope, inside the fear, and he asked her more than once if she was certain, and she answered with words every single time because after everything that was the language they had built. In the morning, she woke with her cheek over his heart and whispered that she remembered everything. He opened his eyes and said, so did he. She did not move into the mansion. She kept the apartment and she kept the job and she spent nights with him because she wanted to and not because a meal and a bed depended on it. And he never asked her to explain a night she chose to spend alone. 6 months later, she was sitting on her own bathroom floor with her back against the tub when he found her. He saw the test in her hand and lowered himself down beside her on the tile without a word. Neither of them celebrated. The old grief came into that room for the joy could and sat down between them and had to be acknowledged before anything else was allowed to happen. He did not ask what the doctor said. He did not ask where she would live. He did not ask what she was going to do. He asked her what she needed. And Iris started to cry because it had taken this man 59 years and one catastrophic failure to learn that question, and he had learned it. She said she needed him to be afraid with her without turning his fear into rules. He took her hand and said he could do that. She said she needed to keep working unless she and her doctor decided otherwise, and that the decision would be made by the two of them and reported to him afterward. He said yes. She said she needed no nursery until she asked for one. Not a paint sample, not a folded blanket in a drawer. Nothing. His eyes filled and he nodded and he said yes. And she said she needed him to be happy, even if happiness terrified them both. He pressed her hand against his mouth and said he was terrified. Then he said, and I am happy, and his voice broke on the second half of it. The pregnancy did not unfold as a miracle. It unfolded as a series of careful weeks, each one negotiated separately. Every appointment carried a dread that sat on her chest from the moment she woke until the moment a heartbeat filled the room, and then the dread let go for a few days and came back. She worked, she cut her hours when exhaustion demanded it, and not 1 hour before, and she refused to become a fragile object living inside his fear. He learned to ask a different question. Instead of issuing instructions, he learned to ask whether help would feel helpful today. Some days she said yes, some days she said no. He survived both answers, and that was the entire achievement of his life. At 7 weeks, the technician moved the wand, paused, and turned the screen slightly. Iris stopped breathing. Dario's hand tightened around hers, and even then, even with the blood roaring in his ears, he did not pull her toward him without asking. He said in a voice that came out wrong, whether something was wrong. The technician smiled and said no. She said she was finding the second heartbeat. 2 rapid rhythms filled the room. Dario stared at the screen and said the word second like it was in a language he did not speak. The technician confirmed it. Twins. He turned to Iris and said two, and Iris, laughing and crying at the same time with her free hand over her face, said apparently neither of them wanted to arrive alone. At 20 weeks, they learned one was a girl and one was a boy, and afterward he sat in the parked car with both hands on the steering wheel and did not start the engine. She said he was quiet. He said that he had once believed the best thing he could do for a woman was prevent her from building a family with him. She said he had been wrong. He said catastrophically. She put his hand on her stomach, and one of them kicked, and his whole face changed, and then the second one kicked a moment later, and he whispered that they were already arguing. She said they were his. He said cruel woman. She said controlling man. They built the nursery together at that time, and she chose the wall color, and he assembled one crib incorrectly and refused help for 40 minutes before conceding that the instructions were unclear. And Helena photographed him sitting on the floor surrounded by loose screws with his reading glasses pushed up into his hair. Iris saved that picture and looked at it more often than she admitted. The cream blanket from the first pregnancy did not go into either crib. They put it in a small memory box on a shelf where it stayed. Their first child did not disappear because 2 more were coming. Love made room. It did not replace. Labor started during a storm, and the man who had once sat calmly while a knife wound was cleaned under his ribs drove badly enough that Iris threatened to deliver in the car if he did not slow down. At the hospital, he came close to arguing with a vending machine that had taken his money and returned nothing, and Helena had to physically steer him away from it. 14 hours. He stayed. He wiped her face and held her through contractions and never once told her to be strong. When she cried and said she could not do it, he put his mouth against her ear and told her she was allowed to hate this. He told her she could hate every second of it and still want them. Their daughter came first, red-faced and furious, and they named her Delia. Their son came 9 minutes later, quieter, and gripped his father's finger with a determination that made the nurse laugh out loud, and they named him Mateo. When the nurse put Delia into Dario Ferrante's arms, he looked down at her like the world had suddenly become too small a container for what he was feeling, and he said out loud that she was real, and Iris wrecked and laughing through tears said both of them were, and that he was going to have to learn their names. He bent over the bed and put his forehead against hers. Thank you was not enough, so he did not say it. He said he loved her instead. She said she knew. He said she could say it back. She said she had just delivered 2 children and that he should not become demanding at this stage. He laughed while he was crying, which she had only seen him do twice. The first months were not a beautiful painting. Delia screamed every evening at 7 for 11 weeks. Mateo refused a bottle from anyone except his father and then fell asleep halfway through every feeding. Iris's sleepwalking came back briefly during the worst of the exhaustion, and this time nobody panicked because the safety plan belonged to her and had for 2 years. One night he found her standing in the nursery doorway with her eyes open and nothing behind them. He did not touch her. He said her name. He asked her where she was. He called Helena exactly as agreed, and he stepped back and he waited. She woke in her own bed the next morning, with him sitting in a chair a few feet away, not lying beside her. She asked what happened. He told her all of it plainly without dramatizing it and without leaving anything out. She asked if she had done anything embarrassing. He said she had attempted to fold Mateo's blanket while Mateo was still wrapped in it. She covered her face and said, "The baby must have objected," he said loudly. She asked if the entire house knew. He said only Helena himself and one extremely judgmental infant. She laughed until her ribs hurt, and somewhere in the middle of it, she understood that the condition which had once threatened to cost her a room, a job, a reputation, and every choice she had left had been reduced to what it always should have been: a plan, honesty, and people who understood the difference between protection and possession. Theo never came back to the hotel. He sent a letter 8 months after Delia and Mateo were born, apologizing without asking for anything. And Iris read it twice and put it in a drawer and did not answer it for a year. She sent birthday gifts to Callie. She met the child in a park twice and held her, and cried in the car afterward and did not go back to the house. Boundaries did not erase love. They gave it a shape that no longer consumed her. Helena retired at 69 and did not leave. Dario had a small house on the property refitted for her needs, and she came up to the main kitchen most mornings anyway, and Delia learned to walk holding onto her cardigan. Rosalind read about the trial in the papers and wrote one letter, and it was not angry. She wrote that she had wondered for 25 years what she had done wrong, and that she was glad to finally know it had not been her. Dario answered it in 3 sentences and never spoke to her again. And Iris, who had read both letters because he handed them to her without being asked, understood that this was what a closed door looked like when nobody had been thrown out of it. 3 years later, Iris came home from the hotel one evening and found all 3 of them asleep in the nursery. The twins sprawled across their father, a picture book open on the floor. The silver had taken over his hair almost entirely by then. Fatherhood had softened nothing about the man. It had simply given all that strength somewhere gentle to go. Delia opened one eye and whispered that Papa fell asleep first. Iris said that was a historic event. Dario opened his eyes and said he had been ambushed. Mateo yawned and demanded the story again. Iris said their father had read the same story 4 times. 5, he corrected. He said they were unreasonable negotiators and that he had no idea where they got it. She crossed the room and kissed his forehead, and her wedding ring caught the lamplight. They had married in a small ceremony after the twins' first birthday with 11 people present. Not because a scandal required it, not because a pregnancy required it, not because debt or danger or survival required it. Because 2 people who had learned the hard way what consent actually costs had decided, fully awake, to keep choosing each other in front of witnesses. The Navy suitcase was still in the storage closet. Empty. She never threw it out. Basma asked her once why she kept it, and Iris said she kept it for the same reason a person keeps the X-ray of a bone that healed wrong and then healed right. Because it had never really been about having somewhere to go. It had been about this, that every night the door she walked through was a door she chose, and the man on the other side of it had learned to leave it unlocked, and then learned something harder, which was to stop reaching for the handle at all. He still asked her the 3 questions. Not every night, but often enough that the twins grew up thinking it was a joke their parents shared and would understand later. Are you awake? Do you know where you are? Why did you come? And every time Iris Callahan answered him the same way, in her own words, in her own voice, wide awake and entirely her own. She had walked into that room once with no memory and no choices left. She spent the rest of her life walking into it on purpose.